The UFC hosted 43 live events in 2023, with 9 new undisputed champions being crowned, with 4 of them being underdogs. Before we get into the top 10 underdogs that were victorious this past year, let's go over some fun stats and tidbits that pertain to these underdogs. In total, underdogs went 153 and 329 for a 32% hit rate. Just some quick notes before we actually get into it. Odds are based on the graphic shown in the tail of the tape before each fight. Draws and no contests were obviously not taken into account, as well as pick'ems of -110 or -115s against -105s. Thus, the shortest dog that is being accounted for is a +100. Now with that out of the way, let's take a look at each underdog by weight class. We'll start off with the men's divisions here. As you guys can see, that the most live underdogs usually came from the featherweight division, where they won 23 of their 57 fights. That's nearly a 40% hit rate. People love to blame the volatility of heavyweights as why it's so difficult to predict those matchups. However, only 5 of 32 heavyweights were able to pull off the upset in 2023 for a 16% hit rate. Out of the 392 men's division matchups, only 121 of the fighters were able to pick up upsets, winning at a 31% clip. Moving over to the women's divisions here, as you guys can see, the flyweights were the most successful in terms of pulling off upsets, nearly winning 50% of their matchups, going 16 of 33. In total, out of the 90 women's fights in 2023, only 32 of the underdogs were able to pull off upsets, hitting at 35%. Moving over to the method of victory for all of these underdogs, of the 153 that hit, it was half of them winning by decision, as 77 of them were able to get their hand raised after 15 or 25 minutes of fighting. Of those 77 decisions, 56 of them were unanimous, 19 of them were by split decision, and 2 of them came via majority decision. We had 55 underdogs win by knockout, 20 of them win by submission, and then 1 of them win by disqualification. If you guys have a good enough memory, I'm sure you guys can figure out who that was, although I possibly will be touching on them later on in this segment. Now, looking at underdogs from a monthly perspective, April was the livest month for these underdogs to go out there and profit, as they hit nearly 50% of the time, winning 22 of their 45 matchups. The least profitable month for underdogs was November, as only 6 of the 32 hit for a 19% hit rate. The most profitable underdog card of the year came on April 22nd at UFC Vegas 71, which was headlined by a heavyweight matchup between Sergey Pavlovich and Curtis Blades. That night, Pavlovich pulled off the underdog upset as a +135 dog. Also on the card, Bruno Silva pulling off the upset over Brad Tavares, Christos Giagos over Ricky Glenn, Mohamed Usman over Junior Tafa, William Gomez over Francis Marshall, and Brady Hiestand over Batkaril Dana. Underdogs went 6-2 that night, hitting at a 75% clip. Lastly, some final tidbits for you guys before we get into the top 10 dogs of 2023. Main event underdogs went 17-26 for a 39% hit rate. There were 7 events where 6 underdogs were able to pull off the upset. There were 5 events where only 1 underdog won on the night. There were 7 events where 50% of the underdogs won. There was also a 5-event streak between UFC 289 in June and UFC 290 in July, where 5+ underdogs won on each event. Of the 153 underdogs that won this past year, 40 of them were +200 or better for a 26% hit rate, and 10 of them were +300 or better for a 6% hit rate. With those fun stats and tidbits out of the way now, let's get right into the top 10 dogs of 2023.
Number 10.
It was a 3-year hiatus for Veronica Hardy when she made her return back in March. She was sporting a new last name, as she had recently married former UFC fighter and commentator Dan Hardy, and it was clear that there was something different about her when she stepped into the cage that night as a +320 underdog. She utilized great footwork and takedown defense, and utilized a damage-based approach to defeat the grappler, as she was able to successfully pull off the upset once again as a +320 underdog.
Number 9.
After falling short on the 2020 season of the Contender Series and losing his following fight, Muhammad Naimov went on a 3-fight winning streak on the regional scene to line up this short notice replacement spot for him to take on Jamie Mullarkey. He dropped the first round by getting backed up and grinded on for the majority of it, but halfway through the second round he landed a beautiful counter to find the club and drum victory over Jamie Mullarkey, allowing him to pick up an upset as a plus 350 underdog.
Number 7.
That's right, we had to skip number 8 because we got two guys coming in at number 7, the first of which is Mr. Bobby King Green, who had a main event slot against Grant Dawson. It seemed like the UFC was behind Grant Dawson, giving him his first main event opportunity. He had a 12-fight unbeaten streak and coming off the biggest win of his career against tough out Damir Ismagulov. Unfortunately for him, Bobby Green only needed 33 seconds to put his lights out and pull off the upset as a plus 380 underdog. The second fighter to pull off an upset as a plus 380 underdog was Jeka Seregi as he made his UFC debut against Lucas Alexander. Seregi originally came up short on the road to UFC finale earlier that year. However, the UFC still decided to sign him due to his finishing nature, as he had 12 finishes in his 13 wins before joining the roster. He was able to land a big shot after crashing the pocket and finishing Alexander 90 seconds into the first round.
Number 6.
If you guessed Cody Brundage earlier when I was talking about the lone DQ victory from an underdog this year, you are correct. Cody Brundage came into his fight against Jacob Malkoun on a 3-fight losing streak and seemingly fighting for his job. He got controlled for all but 35 seconds of the entire fight, where he ultimately ate an illegal elbow that the referee deemed intentional on behalf of Jacob Malkoun, earning Cody Brundage the upset victory as a plus 410 underdog.
Number 5.
It seemed like the UFC was fully bought into the Gabriel Bonfim experiment as he came in as a 15-0 super hot prospect against veteran Nicholas Dalby. Dalby was coming in on a 3-fight winning streak, looking his best in a long time, especially considering that he was 5-1 since returning to the UFC. Bonfim controlled the first 7 minutes with his grappling and damage, but Dalby continued to show resistance even while being put in bad spots, and that allowed him to put the pressure on Bonfim in the second round as Bonfim started to slow down, allowing Dalby to find the finish in the dying seconds of that round. That allowed him to go out there and pull off the plus 425 underdog upset.
Number 4.
Bypassing the traditional route to get to the UFC through the Contender Series, Ultimate Fighter, or even being a regional champion, Elvis Brenner was signed to the UFC and put up against Subera Tuhugov back in February. He had a competitive back and forth fight with Tuhugov, but it seemed like most people were leaning Tuhugov through all 3 rounds. With 18 scorecards from the media on MMA decisions seeing it in favor of Tuhugov, as well as the fans scoring in Tuhugov's favor, it's largely considered a robbery that Elvis Brenner was able to pick up the upset victory as a plus 430 underdog.
Number 3.
It was supposed to be a routine title defense for Israel Adesanya as he took center stage in Australia, close to his home of New Zealand. And even though his original opponent Dricus du Plessis was not ready, he accepted Sean Strickland just so that he can perform in front of that Australian crowd. Unfortunately for him, he bit off more than he could chew that night as he went out there and lost 4 rounds on all 3 judges' scorecards, and ultimately giving Sean Strickland the middleweight title. It was the awkward pressure and defensive style of Strickland that gave Adesanya problems and ultimately allowed Strickland to strap that middleweight title around his waist as a plus 490 underdog.
Number 2.
Yes, it is the second time that you are seeing Elvis Brenner on this top 10 list as he pulled off another upset against Guram Kutateladze. He was fresh off his plus 430 upset over Tuhugov back in February and returned in another big underdog spot here against Kutateladze at plus 500. He was bloodied and battered through the first 2 rounds, but it was obvious Kutateladze was starting to slow down. Brenner turned on the jets in the final round and eventually got the finish, and even though he was the one sporting the crimson mask, he was able to get his hand raised as a plus 500 underdog.
Number 1.
Similar to Israel Adesanya, Valentina Shevchenko was seen to be making a routine title defense when she took on Alexa Grasso at UFC 285. It was a hot start for Grasso as she won the first round on all three judges' scorecards, which is when Shevchenko decided to switch things up, start chasing a grapple-heavy approach where she was able to win the next 2 rounds on all three judges' scorecards. Unfortunately for Shevchenko, it seemed like getting the takedowns was becoming harder and harder, and it was an ill-fated spinning back kick that Grasso was able to take advantage of, leaping on the back of the champion and sinking in the rear naked choke to pull off the biggest upset of 2023, cashing as a plus 600 underdog, but most importantly, becoming the new women's flyweight champion of the world. It was clearly a year of big upsets, especially in big title fight moments for Alexa Grasso and Sean Strickland. I can't wait to see what 2024 has in store for underdogs and big moments which make us love this sport as much as we do. Make sure you guys hit that like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, as there will be a ton of new content for this channel in 2024, staying very busy